Like Sam is not sponsoring us right now. Send us a couple dollars, Sam. That mic on that TV is really powerful too. That's probably what it is. The mic that's on top of your TV is picking your volume. You have to keep your volume very low.
Yeah, get your volume down on your computer. And you're up. But your video's not going yet. There you are.
But I can hear y'all in there.
Good.
Yeah. You're not muted, are you?
Nope, you're good.
But I can.
So you might just want to turn the volume, mute your computer. Wait, can you hear me from upstairs too?
Yeah. Dr. Hughes, if you just mute your laptop. I did. Oh, okay. Are you still getting feedback? Just that mic is picking.
Unmute your screen just so we can see what's happening before we start.
Mic check, 1 2 1 2.
You're good.
You're good on our end.
Mm-hmm.
I can hear y'all.
Good.
So when she speaks, we have.
But I can hear y'all in there.
Right. That's because we're
Okay.
Uh-huh. We might have to mute when she talks. We'll mute when you talk.
Okay, mute yourselves. Oh, goodness, now I can hear myself. Oh, that's going to worry me. Should I go upstairs?
Are you getting
Mm-hmm. Or I could go upstairs.
It's either or. I mean, you're in the beat,
Yes.
so JT says come upstairs.
Come on up. Come on up. We'll be lit.
I think I'll move it upstairs. I'm just afraid it's going to. Now I don't hear so much. Well, yeah, I do. I'll start being a whole lot extra.
Because we have about like a set of those, and we could set them up in the classroom. And that's the reason why we brought them, so you can see the entire classroom.
Oh, gosh, that hurt.
Okay, cool.
In 2 minutes, everybody, we'll get started. We're waiting for everyone else to dial in. So thank you for your patience as we get going.
Everybody lose our credibility.
I love like the flashes of the stairs.
She's like walking in.
Did you start recording yet?
It starts.
Oh, how am I going to do? What am I going to do?
Or they could chop it down like that.
Oh, I know. Okay.
But I can't see the script. I know.
Absolute most.
Mm-hmm.
Peace and love, everyone. We're going to get started here shortly. We'll do a live conversation with the Dream Team. Just wait for folks to get in position. Hopefully you can stick around. JT, by the way, I tagged you on Facebook Live.
Appreciate it, Nate.
Yeah. How are we up? Number are we up to registration?
30 seconds.
Y'all ready to get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Peace and love, everyone. My name is Dr. Nate. We're going to do introductions to everyone here shortly. This is very much kind of a casual, get to know you, behind the scenes look at the Dream Collective. We're going to talk a little bit about our process and journey that brought us to this point, that brought us to this work. Field a couple questions. We just don't want to be like a faceless entity that is existing. A lot of folks have been asking us questions about our organization, how we operate, but as well as how can you be involved. We'll leave plenty of time for questions. If you do have a question, all we ask is that you place them in the Q&A tab so that we can hopefully get to as many as possible with our time together. I'm trying to think, was there anything else I'm missing in this intro? Oh, yes. We're having issues with YouTube Live. Google got some beef going on right now. But we're going to still muscle through this, and we are going to upload this video to our YouTube channel as well as it will be on our website. So we apologize for the technical difficulties that are a little bit out of our control. And just to kind of set the groundwork for while we're doing this, the process of remembering, looking back to understand where we come from, but also to understand why we are at this point, hence the Sankofa reference. And we're going to start off this process about really what it meant to be an anti-racist, but also to like, how did we get to this point? So we're going to actually yield to the wisdom within this space, and it is our dean, Dr. Robin Hughes. So please, Dr. Robin Hughes, want to take it from here?
Yeah, so I want to start out by first just saying that one doesn't become an anti-racist like overnight. It's sort of an evolution. You don't get to this particular space by reading an article or reading a book or using the next coolest mantra that someone said. That it just doesn't happen like that. So it takes some work, it takes practice. I was talking to my daughter who plays volleyball, and I'm always talking about practice, practice, practice. And she's always telling me, I'm not her coach, I'm not her coach, I'm not her coach. But when it comes to this stuff, I am. And I want her to listen to me and know that it takes some work to get to this particular space. So I would say that I've put in some work. I haven't put in all the work that I intend to put in over the next however many years. But I was also born in a particular space and time. So I was born in actually Tulsa, Oklahoma, but raised in Fort Worth, Texas. So I was born in the middle of the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, and that's very meaningful. So the neighborhoods back then were very segregated, and that was because it was very normal to segregate, and it was called segregation, and it was called Jim Crow. And let's be clear that Jim Crow is not gone. He's still here. He's just become Sir James the Eagle. Just happens to be in hiding, and in hiding because we've all agreed not to talk about it. But Jim Crow is here, and we still live in segregated neighborhoods. They just don't look like the neighborhood that I grew up in. So back then in Black neighborhoods, they were filled with everybody. You had to live there. So the nurses lived with the doctors, lived with the attorneys, lived with the day workers, the janitors, the teachers. We all lived in the same neighborhood. And that meant something. It meant that everybody looked out for each other. And I can remember many a walk of shame because back then it wasn't called a phone tree, but when you got in trouble, there was a phone call. And when you got home, everybody in the neighborhood knew what you had done. So you walked out of your car into your house with a whole neighborhood looking at you like you have just let the entire, not only neighborhood down, but the entire Black population down by acting a fool while you were at school. So everybody knew that. And I mean, the folks that did your nails, the people that did your hair, the folks that looked down your throat or up your behind, all of those folks looked at you. And all of those folks were your teachers. I see things differently just from growing up in that particular neighborhood and with particular people, but also I have two parents who would have been considered probably Black nationalists. There were lessons all of the time from both parents. My father was a coach, he's 90 something now, and in his head, he is still a coach, but he was a coach that never shut his mouth. And he worked in something that was called a Prairie View League, because again, there was Jim Crow. And in the Prairie View League, it was all Black teams, and the other UIL were white teams. So it made a lot of changes. And I watched him always have his mouth open, always in trouble. And now I hear good trouble. Back then we heard good trouble. We heard sick and tired of being sick and tired. We heard by any means necessary. There were lots and lots of these sound bites that meant open your goddamn mouth all of the time. You didn't get to be quiet back then. I don't ever remember anybody, especially my parents, telling me be quiet, because they were telling me to be quiet. That meant be complicit, only get stuff for yourself. That was selfish. So I never heard that. I never heard that in my neighborhood. I never heard it from my parents. In the summers, I spent time in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I had shared with the group that my grandmother's house is situated sort of smack dab in the middle of Black Wall Street. So Black Wall Street physically is considered to be this street called Greenwood, but there's an area, 3 streets. It's Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. That's G-A-P, Gap, and that's where the Gap Band got their name. Well, my grandmother's house is on Pine. And she's got the last, she's passed now, but she has the last Black owned business home in that particular neighborhood, which is not a neighborhood anymore. Folks came by and made all the claims that they make to get your property. And she just fought back and kept it. So I learned from neighborhood in Fort Worth called Stop Six, learned from neighborhood in Tulsa, there was just a Black neighborhood. Also learned from my parents, and also learned from no other language to use than badass nuns in Fort Worth, from Our Lady of Victory and from Nolan High School, and badass white nuns. So I'm learning lessons about whiteness way back when from white folks and white nuns in the Catholic Church. And specifically the nuns that integrated my school, because the school was all white, and the priest said, we're not having all of this anymore. We want to integrate it. So these badass nuns came from, I want to say Germany, but I don't think it's there. I think they were French. Came and integrated my school and dared folks to try and roll up on them. And in fact, and you can find this somewhere, if you Google like St. Mary's, Our Lady of Victory School, St. Mary's Sisters of Namur, they had a parent that called in and said, it is your fault that my child will not make it to heaven because because you have decided to integrate the school. And so the nun's response was, your baby ain't gonna make it into school because you have decided to be a racist. So these are the people that I think, not think, I know, help to situate my thinking, my framework, how I have lived and will continue to live as not just an anti-racist, but a person who will always keep their mouth open, always take at risk, because to do like good work and to get in good trouble, that doesn't mean that you're not going to get your butt whooped. You're still going to get it. That's difficult. That's a difficult space. It's risky. Somebody's always going to try to go in on you. It's a hard space to live in, but I've lived in it so long, I do not know anything different. So I am, like a friend of mine and I always say, I'm like 2 minutes from a turnip truck. So 2 minutes from being booted out, I will find a job on a farm somewhere picking turnips. It does not bother me because I refuse to be quiet and live an existence among racist and racism and not say something every time, every doggone time. And if I am quiet, it's because I'm busy doing some other peripheral mess, but I will get to it. I've looked at a listserv, in fact, today, and I can't wait to respond sometime after 5 o'clock. So that's a little bit about who I am and where I came from.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And even hearing this story again, still like awestruck. Like, one, I love Charlie Wilson, and the reference to Gap Band is like, this is probably the reason why I love him so much. But also, too, just like the complications of what we kind of think about what the ingredients are that makes up an anti-racist. And we appreciate who you are, what you've done for all of us within this space, and for so many scholars across this country. So, JT, can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to this journey, and, you know, as an anti-racist, what does that mean to you, and why do you do this work?
Well, I have the unenviable task of following the wisdom and brilliance of our dean. I'm gonna try my best. So for me, as I reflect on this question, I think about family. And I was a child born in the 80s. And my parents, I come from a middle class home. Both of my parents were there. Before the Cosby Show was really problematic, that was the model that I would often refer to as our home. Having a mother that worked in education and a father that worked in business, we really bought wholesale the notion that Black folks could integrate with no problems. And my dad, when I think about his history, he was born in a little town in East Texas called Teague. And one of the few conversations that we had about race before he passed was his experiences in high school. So he came up in the 70s, and during a time of integration in Texas, where Black schools were closing down and integration was happening within cities, he ended up going to the University of North Texas. And when I asked him how he dealt with racism, he said, JT, I didn't. It didn't stop me. He said, I saw how hard my father worked, and I just assumed that the racists were going to do what the racists are going to do, that no one is going to stop me from achieving the things that I want to achieve. And I sit with that a lot. I think on the opposite end is my mother, who was a special ed teacher for several decades. And her experience, she was a lot more guarded and a lot more concerned about what integration looked like. She was part of the first integrated class of Greenville High School, and integration for her was terrible. She was picked on every single day. because white folks did not want Black bodies in their space. It defiled it. So when I think about where my activism or commitment to anti-racism comes from, it comes from my parents who made sacrifices for me. My mom, I remember being in the 6th grade and applying to be a part of the honors track in our high school. And you had to take a test. I took the test 2 times, and both times did not meet the scores to be placed in our honors program. And my mother, in an all-white neighborhood, demanded that her Black child be put in these honors classes because she understood how tracking works. And she understood the limitations that would be imposed on me if I didn't get into honors programs early. And it's funny, as a kid, you're not aware of these things, right? Like, you just living your life. Mom said, I remember my mom asking me, JT, I'm about to sign this waiver for you to be in these honors classes. Are you going to do the work? And I kind of thought it was weird because, like, Mom, you know me, I work hard. But when I think about the surrounding environment and the weight of a community that she's carrying on her shoulders, knowing that she's went out and called the school board all sorts of names to get her child in this program. And if I fail, it's not just me failing, it's the failing of a larger community. So again, when I think about what it means to be an anti-racist, I think about my history as a child, and then working on my PhD, I can't help but think of Dr. Hughes as someone who inspired and encouraged me to live fearlessly. I think from undergrad until I started my time at IU, quite frankly, I lived in a space of fear that folks would find out that I'm an imposter. I'm not what I say I am, that I don't have the skills that I need to be successful in a white world. And I'll say to you explicitly, Dr. Hughes, you were the one that encouraged me and believed in me and gave me several opportunities to do well. And I often think what my graduate career would look like had I not been surrounded by strong Black women who were advocating for justice and equity. I feel very fortunate to have these models speak truth into my life and encourage me. And now as a tenure track faculty member, starting my 3rd year, I'm just trying to live up to that model, letting my students know that they are so powerful and they can transform those spaces that they're working in. So for me, anti-racism is not a fad. It's something that I've seen throughout my entire life, specifically by Black women fighting for justice and equity on my behalf.
Wonderful. Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Wow. Talking about following Dr. Hughes, now I gotta follow you. I mean, there's so much from both of your testimonies that resonates not only with similar definitions of this work, but also to kind of those shared experiences where, whether it be one event or not having the option, where it almost seems like this work, like, how can you not do it? How can you not try to resist the things that are so apparently wrong? And so for myself, you know, I don't know of any one particular moment where I was like, oh yeah, like, this is when my activism started. Growing up, I grew up on the other side of the tracks, very much operated and lived in the fringes financially, as well as other activities as well. And I, in hindsight, have a different appreciation for that space. because it allowed me to see humanity in people that were doing very bad things for themselves and the community. But I understood it wasn't as right or wrong as what I was being taught in school or even in church. And that always kind of put in the forefront that it's not as easy to say who's doing right, who's doing wrong. And that very much kind of impacts my perspective in this work. Like, for me, growing up, once again, a child of the 80s, where there wasn't a lot of options in regards to being a biracial kid, because you were either asked, are you the white mixed kid or the black mixed kid? And that was it. When you filled out the census, there were only the 5 options. I don't think bi or multiracial came into like the 2000s or something. So for me, it was kind of, I grew up in an all black space, was closer to my father, paternal father, black side of my family. So for me, it was just, I didn't know any of it. And for me, I knew at a very early age that because of my appearance, I was othered in white spaces. But then as soon as I opened my mouth or you heard what my last name was, it was like, oh, okay, we know exactly what you are. And so for me, I was always kind of faced with this very apparent kind of racial socialization. So for me, race was always in the forefront of all my interactions. And I can remember growing up on the fringes, education was not a priority. It was survival. And whatever that survival looked like for you, especially in the context and space in the neighborhood I grew up in, it is what it is. So for me, my parents instilled the skill sets that they learned throughout their lives in me in hopes that I would take something or find something and move from that. And one thing I just couldn't escape from was the need to change just the blatant disregard for humanity. And I would say in regards to more heightened level, I remember my uncle taking me to the Million Family March in 2000, I think it was. And it was the first time I seen Minister Farrakhan. It was the first time I seen so many Black people, so many Black intellects, so many Black entertainers all in one space. And it was like very inspiring. And I would say, like I said, I did rebel-ish stuff throughout my life, and activism just kind of fits in with that. And once again, you couple that with my heightened sense of racial identity because I am biracial. For me, anti-racism is just, I can't see how it separates from who I am. So for me, for this work, it's so intimate to my existence. I have to pay honor to the Black matriarchs that played an important role, from Dr. Hughes, Dr. Huff, Natasha Flowers, so many people that have given me example for me to learn from and to realize how much I still have to change within myself.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Hernandez. Let's see. God, it started off much like everyone mentioned. It did come about as far as with my parents. From my background, I was born in Godfrey, Illinois. Very small to a very working class, blue collar family. My father's Mexican, my mom's everything but Mexican, she's Irish, and very blonde hair, blue eyed, and was very much an activist. So kind of set the stage for the activism for me, but she was a part of the ERA movement. At that time, Phyllis Schlafly was really big in Alton. But as we know now, looking back, the ERA movement was definitely problematic in the fact that it was racist in its inception and was really working for white women. So that's about how I could describe my childhood. It wasn't, my parents would probably tell you they were not racist. However, we didn't interact with Black people. They didn't interact with Black people. There were no Black people in our neighborhood. My father was not what I would say probably an anti-racist. He was. He would use the N-word. He would get upset if a Black family would move into a local neighborhood, that type of thing. And I had no interaction with Black people personally either until my parents got divorced. And at the age of 10, I moved to St. Louis. And this is the first time I'm going to school and I'm in an integrated community and really experiencing that. So as I go through school, I'm still pretty active. I was very active against the first Iraq War and was marching for things, but they were very white issues of ideas of activism. When I went to SIUE to become a teacher, I had an opportunity to work with one of the professors there, and I really wanted to work with kids who nobody really wanted, homeless, incarcerated, and so he steered me toward the emotionally disturbed was what it was called back then, children. And so through my kind of education in that, I decided I had a really bad case of the white savior syndrome, in which I felt like I was going to be Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Minds, right? And I was here to save all the Black and brown kids. So I go into the classroom in an incarceration facility, and what I witnessed was some of the most horrific human rights abuse I've ever seen. Police officers that were macing, tasing students as young as 8 years old, students being placed in padded cells that were 4 feet square and left there for hours. A lot of that was just listening to other white educators talking about the students and the emphasis on discipline, punishment, control, and containment of these students. And as I continued my education and I went into graduate school, I had an amazing doctoral advisor who gave me the article by Bruce Anthony when it talks about the plantation model of education and how classrooms function as a plantation. And I was blown away. It was my understanding that I was basically an overseer for a white supremacist institution that was not about the education of brown and Black kids. It was about the containment and the control and the inherent criminality that was seen in these kids. It changed everything for me in that education, and working with colleagues of color brought me into this work. And from there, I went into the Ferguson School District, and I started in July 1st. On July 1st and on August 13th, Michael Brown was murdered. And so it opened the door for me to start work with teachers and have them seeing themselves as part of this highly racist system and how it was functioning. And so from that, I began doing that work and going into higher ed. And I just feel so grateful and lucky that I had colleagues of color who took the time to call me out on my own racist attitudes, on my own background and lived experience, and how I was perpetuating the system and not fighting against it. And so it was really them who taught me how to be anti-racist. And then when Dr. Hughes joined us last year in the School of Education, she, for whatever reason, saw something in me and asked me to become part of a collective that would start to do the anti-racism work in education. And that's when JT comes into play and Jessica comes into play, and then we get to hire Nate, and Nate comes into play, which brings it full circle into taking our lived experiences and what we've learned in the field and bringing it to doing that real work in these white supremacist institutions that are not about adding value, right, to people of color, but maintaining a system of which privileges white people. So that's what got me here, for sure.
Yeah. Jessica. All right. So my name is Jessica Krim, and when I think about what brought me to this work, I would say it would be a couple of things. Going back to the theme of family, I was raised in suburban Wilmington, Delaware, and my parents were Jewish, but my mom converted from, she used to say, we are the religion of the church closest to the house. So she converted, so I was raised to be Jewish, but through that religion, it follows the maternal lineage, but among the Jewish community, you're considered not really Jewish if your mom converted. So I've always had kind of a feeling of, where do I fit in? You know, so I clearly didn't fit in with any of my friends that lived around me who were Christian or Catholic. I didn't fit in with the Jewish kids who lived on the other side of the road, whose parents were lawyers or doctors. Neither of my parents went to college, and I think, you know, they were really content to have their own family, raise their family, and I didn't have a lot of exposure, similar to Jen's story, a lot of exposure to people of color. And it was really kind of like a tight-knit family unit. You know, but I think probably from my teenage years, which is when I started learning things from my family, like what people were referred to, you know, and those were they all came from family members. I can really remember them quite distinctly. But I started thinking, through being Jewish, everybody always said, you don't look like you're Jewish, you know, because Jewish people have traditionally olive skin, you know, they're Sephardic looking, they have dark hair, and I have blonde hair and blue eyes. So I always thought about, you know, and in the Jewish community, the Holocaust is, you know, it's very important. So, you know, I always thought, like, what if I lived then, you know, like, and I looked how I did, you know, like, what would I do? Like, how would I act? You know, like, would I pretend not to be Jewish? And a large part of my 20s was pretending not to be Jewish because I can choose, right? Like, I didn't feel like I belonged, but I don't wear it, you know, like I look like any other Aryan person. So I just started to just think about that. And then I think as I got older, I just started being really suspicious of my privilege. You know, like, I look around and I think about, like, people have it hard. Things have been pretty easy for me. And I think it's, you know, my parents, neither of them went to college. And here I am, I've got a doctorate, you know. So you have to, at least for myself, I had to look at, like, why is it like that? And then just really start examining that. And as a teacher, if I say I'm going to teach all students, I'm beholden to look at, where am I teaching all students, where am I not teaching all students? And up until a few years ago, that has been completely unexamined for me. You know, it's gradually gotten more and more, I've gotten more and more involved, but definitely came to a culmination when Dean Hughes asked me to be part of this group. And I'm learning every day, and I think the thing that most sticks with me is that these are the issues that matter. You know, like, we get bombarded with the minutia of daily life, and this, to me, really matters. You know, I can really make a difference here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I just kind of want to highlight for folks we got zooming in or watching on Facebook Live. I think what's beautiful and great about this group is that our journeys are not singular or monolithic. And if you couldn't hear from the testimonies from everyone, is that there's no sense of arrival, right? You're not like, yay, I got my merit badge, right? Like, I can do this work. And it's like, no. And I think it's two, and we wanted to share this to, one, be vulnerable and show that we're incomplete humans trying to do the work of humanity. As well as, I think there's a misnomer that you have to have, like, this certain level of expertise or intelligence or experience to engage in this work authentically, and that's not true. Your authentic self, your authentic past makes you eligible to get into this work. And you don't have to know everything. We're constantly learning from each other. We're like constantly being checked, right? Like that's what we're hopefully trying to model and build from. So with that, we do want to start with a question that was emailed to us first. So Jen, if you want to pose it, and then whoever wants to answer it, and then we can just go through the Q&A. And once again, for those who are just joining, please tap the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom. For those on Facebook, you can type in, and we'll try to get as many questions as possible while we still have time.
Yeah, so our question that was emailed to us was essentially, are we a closed network? Will we be open to the faculty? How can you get involved? And I think our best answer with that is that, of course, this work isn't limited to the 5 of us. There's a lot of people who do the work. But we are calling on people as resources and expertise as things come in. And we want to address issues either at SIUE campus or nationwide. As things come in, we may call on people who have a certain skill set or who can offer a way to help send the message that we're trying to send or promote things. And so, yes, I mean, I feel like we will reach out for resources and for people who want to get involved. It's always good for you to let us know that you really want to be a part of this work, and we can find those opportunities as they come up to be able to see where you can best fit in or help push this kind of work for us as the collective, for sure. And you should email us, right? So at the Dream Collective at siue.edu. You're welcome to email us and let us know, you know, how you feel your positionality could help benefit the work, and we would be happy to have that affiliation. Anybody want to add anything to what I said?
I feel like that sums it up.
That sum it up?
Well, I'll add something really quickly. I think I'm interested in hearing from folks, particularly at SIUE, the work that you're engaging in. I think it's important for us to be able to mobilize different constituency groups on our campus. As I'm looking through the attendees, I see a lot of folks from SIUE, and we'd love to hear from you the work that you all are doing in this area. And if you are interested in supporting our efforts, definitely sign up and let us know the work that you're interested in doing.
Thank you. So we had a question come in that says, as an incoming higher education practitioner, what is your best advice for dismantling racism in the workplace as the new person? Ooh, Robin, that sounds like a question for you. You ready to answer that one?
So is that like a new faculty member, administrator? I guess I can just speak in general, or just someone in the discipline of higher education?
Higher education practitioner was the term used.
Mm-hmm. And how can they go about dismantling racism?
As a new person, like in the workplace, they come in.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. Well, I'm going to have to just complete to my mantra. And that would be, when you see something that ain't right or doesn't look right or doesn't feel right, and you know it's not right, the first thing that you do is you do not think about, I may lose my job, because that's selfish and you're thinking about only you. You can't just think about yourself. You have to think about not just the bigger picture, but humanity and the right thing to do. And so the right thing to do would be to speak up. You always have to be prepared to speak up when you see something that you think is not right. And you know that racism is not right. So in order to dismantle it, you have to say something about it every time. Be the loud voice in the room. Ask others to be the loud voice in the room. Don't be fearful of being painted as the angry whatever person. And I don't want to just bifurcate it and say male or female, but don't be so concerned about being seen as that. To me, that's a great, please consider me an angry Black woman. Because racism and sexism and homophobia, all that stuff makes me mad. I don't get angry. I'm just straight up mad about that. I don't like it. I will not put up with it. Folks know that when I walk into a room, maybe not here so much, but I think already, there are things you cannot talk, or people you cannot talk about in front of me. I will never walk out of a meeting and go to someone and say, you know what so-and-so said about you? Because they would dare say anything about anyone that I know in front of me. You better not, because I'm going to check you immediately. And if I come out with the title of being the angry Black dean or the mean dean or whatever, so what? I'm gonna sleep real good at night because I know I made you uncomfortable. You're not gonna go to bed feeling good that night. And you should feel the same way if you're new, if you're non-tenured, if you're pre-tenure, if you're clinical, if you're a staff member, you have to open up your mouth. I just look at the other side of it, and I've seen folks at previous spaces that I've been in that were quiet. I even remember going up for tenure, and then I'm going to be quiet, going up for tenure. And and you're going to be afraid. I'm not that badass that I'm not afraid when I'm posting up. But as an assistant professor, I wasn't quiet. As an associate, I wasn't quiet. As a full, I'm not going to be quiet. As dean, I'm not going to be quiet. And when I went up for tenure, I was scared to death, all the way to the board of trustees, because I was like, who did I cuss out? Was it a board of trustee member? Because I refused to shut my mouth. And what happened is I was one of the people who, or probably the only one that went up that never kept my mouth closed, and I got not one no vote. Probably because they knew that I would whoop their ass. I didn't. But the folks who were quiet struggled. They had no votes. So, I mean, just decide whether you want to be comfortable thinking that being quiet and apathetic and complicit, if that makes you feel good, I think that you're going to have trouble. You're going to have trouble either way. You're going to have a headache if you open your mouth. You're going to have a heck of a headache if you keep quiet, because you are teaching people a lesson. And that lesson is, and please don't teach it for me, that lesson is to roll over people of color and specifically Black folks, because they ain't going to do nothing. And that's not a good lesson for you to teach. And please don't teach it for me, because it's going to be a hard lesson when they get that tapped by meeting. I'm going to be all kinds of fired.
I love that. I love it. All right, we have another question. So let's see. Yeah, go ahead, Ned.
Because I think this is too important, because, and Dr. Hughes, thank you. I was going to ask you while you were talking about kind of your experience as an assistant professor, because that's a common thing we hear about, like, well, I'm untenured and I don't want to lose, this X, Y, and Z. But I actually remember something you told me a long time ago, and it was like, you can't come in as Clarence Thomas and then try to be Malcolm X. So I think there's something to the authenticity of who you are as a person that you have to negotiate with yourself. And I think what we're trying to model is that you can form a collective, because I would guarantee that if you're feeling some type of way, there are at least 2 or 3 other people in that same space that feel uneasy, or like, I call them Scooby-Doo moments where you're like, huh? And it just, when you look for those people and just ask around, and you keep pushing. Coming from another institution, a very high up administrator pulled me to the side and was like, thank you, because this person and I had constant headbutting throughout my entire tenured and in that space. And as this person was leaving, they disclosed that it was some of the actions that I kind of pushed on them to help them recognize that it was time for them to retire. So I say that not to puff myself up. I say that those times of resistance, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's an email, whether it's just saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable with what you just said. Can we go back to that? That it may not be immediate that you see the change, but it does have an impact, and you are planting seeds in their lives. So you are teaching by resistance.
Absolutely. Love that. Next question, which is really good, and I'm looking at you, JT, because I'm thinking you're going to own this one. I would love to hear your thoughts about how to call people to account who say they do the work and people think that they do the work, but the organization is continually committing acts of internalized superiority and inferiority, horizontal violence in the organization's dynamics. People have quit because they have been set up to fail.
Ooh-wee.
Ooh-wee, that's a question right there. Go ahead, JT, that's you.
Well, thank you for tossing that my way. I think it's run the question by me one more time, because
Okay,
it was a lot.
that was a lot. So here we go. I would love to hear your thoughts about how to call people to account who say they do the work and people think they do the work, but the organization is continually committing acts of internalized superiority and inferiority, horizontal violence in the organization's dynamics. People have quit because they have been set up to fail.
Ooh, that's a lot.
That is a lot.
I go back and forth about the value in calling people out. I think I'm more interested in what are the outcomes that you're working towards. It's not important for me to identify frauds, because frauds eventually identify themselves, right? The important thing for me is who is doing the work. And what I'm trying to do in my position as the president of our Black Faculty Staff Association is organize. Like that's how we get things done. It is never, I think the mistake that a lot of us have bought into is the hero narrative, that there is this one brilliant person that is able to move the minds and consciousness of folks to transform situations. And that's just a lie. The way things get changed is people organize and they work together. The reason that Dr. King could reach the prominence that he reached is because there was a whole community of women and men and queer folks organizing for him and putting their bodies and lives on the line for things to look differently. And to me, that's the question. How are you organizing and mobilizing folks towards change? Because as an individual, I could do some things, but if I want to see systems change, it has to be the collective. I love the notion of Ubuntu, right? That says, I am because we are. And this year for our Black Faculty Staff Association, that's the theme that I'm thinking with. How can I make us exist? Well, not us exist, but how can I will myself to existence through the community, right? Because if I'm not here, if we aren't here, I'm not here. And I think we see that, right? We see when an institution doesn't do right by Black folks leave. So I don't know how well I'm answering the question, but I would be less concerned about identifying folks who aren't quote unquote doing the work and be more concerned about who is. How are we sending out the signal to folks that are interested in change?
Absolutely. Does anybody else have anything to add, do you think, to that response? That's pretty good.
Mr. President had it.
Yeah, you had it. You had it really good. There was a bit of a follow-up, I believe, to the same one. And I think it was a clarification about it was calling to account, not necessarily calling people out about that. So, yeah, if you wanted to kind of expound on that, if you think JT, or do you think you got it?
Sure. I mean, I think a similar thing is, well, one of the things that we're trying to do as an organization, the constituency that I represent in our Black faculty and staff are seeking accountability for our administration currently. And I think that is in institutions around the United States, I think a racial reckoning is happening, particularly at predominantly white institutions. With the death of George Floyd, I think there is a heightened consciousness around what it means to do right by people of color, and more specifically, Black folks. And I think it starts with getting commitments and, again, holding those commitments out in front of the institution. I'll go to the words of Dr. King. He said before the March on Washington that what they were doing was holding America to what they said on paper. If all men are created equal, we need to treat all men in that way. Forgive the gendered language, all people, right? And I think our institutions, especially in the academy, have made a ton of commitments around diversity and inclusion. And I think our work is holding them accountable to those commitments that they've made as an institution. And I know Nate and Dr. Hughes can speak on that, holding institutions accountable to the things that they say they're going to do.
Awesome. Thank you. Good. Okay.
We got 8 minutes left.
All right. So this last question we're going to take is from a student, and we're going to hand this over to Jess. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. Okay. I am a current SIUE student listening to this with my family. I am a member of the SIUE Honors Program, the diversity of which has been called into question by my peers in the program. What can I do as a student within this program to either bring this to people's attention or improve the diversity of the program?
Wow,
good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and thanks for watching with your family, and thanks for your question. I think using your voice to ask questions is a really big first step. I don't think that you're responsible for the diversity of the program. That has to do with the people who design the program and the university itself. But I think that because you're asking this question now, ask this question in every forum you can. You know, ask your faculty members, ask your program directors, ask your deans and provosts and chancellors and the person who's in charge of the honors program. I think that's where I'd start for sure. And be bold.
Yeah, can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
There's a YouTube channel, SIUE has a YouTube channel, or either as SIU. And during one of the meetings, I think it was, what do they call these engaging conversations or conversations of understanding? The very first one, President Mahoney broke down the SATs, and it was not pretty good. I thought it was excellent. And typically, when you have programs, even if you think of like the structure of K-12, when you have programs that are filled with particular students, white and gifted and talented, and who tends to be in special ed? That's a question. Who tends to be in those special ed classes? It's typically because of overplacement based on some sort of attitude or what somebody sees in a classroom. But it also has to do with testing, a standardized test. So I would ask about what are the criteria that one needs in order to become an honor student. and then ask whether those criteria are part and parcel to institutionalized racism.
Right.
Many times they are. If you're requesting, I was just looking at my daughter's school. So she's thinking about like law school there. And if you attend that particular school, you can go straight to law school without an LSAT if you have a score of 1,300 on your SATs. It's no more than 5 years old. Well, who tends to score at 1,300 and who tends not to? So I would ask the institution to look at that. I'll ask. Hi, Mom and Dad. Hey, y'all.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. We're in our last few minutes, and thanks you guys, everybody who is listening in and kind of joining us for our happy hour to kind of talk about our positionality. We do, as the Dream Collective, want to keep you guys up to date on upcoming programming, and so we will be launching a podcast. And it will be a set of 10 podcasts that focus on anti-racism, kind of the primer, like what is the work, what does it look like, and who's doing it. We have amazing guests that are going to come on and talk with us. And we're thinking about the middle of August will be the first podcast. Will be produced and ready to go. And so you can access that through our website, through SIUE. You can also access those from the YouTube channel and the Facebook Live, and we'll have that promoted in all those spaces. What am I forgetting, everybody?
So the one thing that we probably didn't touch on because we're so into this work. So what is it that we do? So as a collective, our primary goal is to, as of right now, and in full transparency, we are reacting to the needs of our communities that we serve, and it's not a fixed thing, right? It lives and breathes with us. Right now, we're focused in on building our community, and part of building our community is highlighting some of the work that we're doing, some of our colleagues from across the nation and globe are doing. So Jennifer was talking about the podcast, Blacktivism in the Academy. We have phenomenal scholars lined up. They're going to talk about their work, what it means and what it looks like. I know a lot of times folks want this 1, 2, 3, how do I start doing this? I haven't read it. I haven't found it. I don't think it exists. So as organically and natural as possible, that's how we operate. We don't have this very distilled, linear kind of logic for how we do X, Y, and Z. We see the work that needs to be done, serve, and we do the work. That's what it is.
Awesome. Great.
Any parting thoughts from our dean?
Change my message.
Nope.
Good. JT, anything?
Oh, speak up.
Parting thoughts?
No, I'm just glad to be able to have happy hour with y'all and talk about the things that matter most to us, and grateful for the audience listening. Check us out, Blacktivism Academy. We're gonna have an episode dropping real soon.
Real soon.
Hopefully I didn't make our producer mad.
Sorry, too. I got that second bedroom here.
But that's it.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming and having a happy hour with us, and we'll be in touch soon. You'll be seeing our faces around. So take care, stay safe, stay healthy. Until next time. Bye everybody.
Peace and love.
Right.